When I was a kid, I once watched my friend playing StarCraft. I gave him advice, something along the lines, move those robots closer to the choke point, to which my friend objected. These are no robots, these are mecha, he said. And I was like, oh, come on, is there really any difference? And he was like, dude, of course there is. Robot is just a computer driving a piece of metal, but mecha is a piece of metal that has a pilot inside. And I was like, thanks for illuminating me, dude, but you should have really moved those mecha to the choke point. I think you are having a Zerg rush now. And he was like, oh crap. The word mecha is actually a bit more inclusive than my friend claimed. It comes from the word mechanical, which was adapted by Japanese, then shortened to the well-known mecha, and then readapted back in English as mechs. In Japanese, technically, you can mean basically any mechanism with this word. A car, a gun, a laptop. But in the modern world, in most cases, when someone says mecha, the thing in question is a gigantic humanoid-shaped robot with a pilot or two inside, seated in the head or the chest of the machine. So, at the very least, for the sake of this video, to establish some sort of system and avoid further confusion, I propose to use these terms. Robots, for tech that is entirely made of mechanical parts and is also controlled by them. Drones, for tech that is entirely made of mechanical parts but is controlled remotely by a human pilot. Mecha, for human-shaped tech with one or more human pilots inside. Exoskeleton, for human-shaped and more or less human-sized tech suit made of mechanical parts. And I guess we can add cyborg to this set, for humans that have several body parts replaced or improved by the inbuilt tech. And we get into a curious situation if we try to place these contraptions on the sci-fi hardness tier list. I mean, we know for sure that robots and drones exist, as well as there are lots of real-life cyborgs with all sorts of augments added to their bodies. These mostly are not the type of cyborgs we see in the movies, though. Real-life cyborgs mostly have implants for medical, not superpower purposes. We have real-life exoskeletons as well, and while some of those are also meant to be of medical assistance, some others are used, for example, in the military to help soldiers carry more and save more stamina. But where are the mecha? Why don't we see them in Ukraine or Middle East? Is there some reason why we don't make them? What type of fiction are mecha at all? Are they only viable in sci-fi games and movies, or can there be some prototypes getting secretly tested on the battlefields of the planet already? Let's see. Let's see what the mecha is made of, for starters. The first thing we notice about mecha, and which differs it from exoskeletons, is that mecha are goddamn huge. Pilot does not really wear mecha as a costume. At least, not directly. Instead, pilot resides in a cabin with some sort of controllers. So the question is, can we build humanoid-shaped structures of immense sizes? The answer is yes, undoubtedly so, as proven by the world's tallest statues. Okay, then can we make them move? And that's harder. The aforementioned statues are different from mecha in that they don't really have human-type anatomy. They have no joints, no muscles and ligaments. They are made of solid blocks of concrete and metals put together in a most suitable shape to stay stable, to just stand, you know, like statues do. If you want something statue-sized to move, you need more than steel and concrete. You need some durabilium type unobtainium. The mechanical substitutes for joints, muscles and other stuff already exist, but they will have serious issues on rescaling. Being kaiju big, mecha face the same issue as kaiju, the square cube law. I won't go deep into it here, but in short, for now, when you scale things up, their surfaces and volumes change at the different rates. So if you make a bone twice longer, its cross-section and resistance will increase 4 times, but its weight will grow 8 times. So you will need to have twice the cross-section to keep it stable. The same will apply to resizing non-living stuff, so if we have materials to make toy mecha or human-sized mecha, that doesn't yet mean that we can make kaiju-sized ones. That means, in essence, that human-shaped mecha should be either much bulkier and more massive than a regular human in their proportions, or they should be made of some really advanced material. And yeah, we stumble upon a Durabilium type unobtainium again. Do we have any of these? Well, in my video on real-life unobtainiums, I touched upon some of them, and yeah, the progress in the field of durabilium seems to keep happening. There are titanium alloys, there are carbon fiber composites, there is graphene, but even these are not yet enough to support, say, a moving Statue of Liberty. I guess we can place the materials for the oversized humanoid-shaped robot into at least hard sci-fi tungsten tier for now, and hope that engineers will come up with some of them in the nearby future. Next on the list of the key mecha components is the pilot, or rather the pilot-to-machine interface. On the first glance, mecha might seem like an easy-to-control vehicle. They are human-shaped after all, and we humans are good at controlling that shape. If we perfect the ergonomics, learning to pilot a mecha might be, say, like learning to ride a bicycle, and can take from a few days to around a week. Instead of perfecting ergonomics, sometime in the future we can actually go the other way. In my recent video on psychics, I have discussed various abilities that we could obtain after adding some electrodes to brains. And from that point of view, things look very cool and interesting for mecha. I'd recommend a book called Livewired if you want to learn more on that topic, but for now, in short, our brains can get used to almost any kind of input and output. So if you equip them with implants connected to AI in the electronic brain of the mecha, you will achieve the ultimate degree of human-to-tech connection. So, while we don't have a lot of known working examples, it seems that pilot-to-mecha interface must be totally diamond tier possible. However, next we have some serious problems, that is, when we look at the power source of the mecha. Any mechanical contraption requires power, and one as huge as mecha will need a really huge one. Can we maybe upscale lithium batteries for that? Well, sadly, it will help very little. First of all, bipedal locomotion is just not that effective as using simple wheels or tracker treads, if you are a machine. Moving all these joints and keeping torso stable would require way more energy than powering, say, a car of the same size. Lithium compounds are the best we have for now, and they fail on many levels. Insufficient energy capacity, long recharge times, also lithium overheats. The most promising alternative to lithium are solid-state batteries, but these actually also have lithium at the core. They just work on a different principle, and their energy density might be only twice higher than the regular lithium tech. Maybe we need to insert some very compact internal power source instead of a battery, huh? Well, the best available option here is a nuclear reactor, which brings its own bunch of problems, starting with the safety of the pilot. Nuclear reactor will require a lot of shielding, like nuclear submarines do, and that will bring in a lot of extra mass, which in case of mecha is much more problematic than in submarines. Then submarines have seawater to cool off the overheated parts of the reactor, which would be another issue for mecha. Besides all that, a nuclear reactor is one of the worst organs for a mecha to have, if it is made to engage in some kind of combat. Reactor damage might lead to meltdown, which will not only seize all the mecha energy supply, but will also turn it into a mini Chernobyl, making hundreds of square kilometers uninhabitable for humans for a while. The next best thing we will have are fusion reactors, but these are still not commercially viable, and the best of the current models that we have demonstrate that these will also require some very heavy shielding, this time from overheated plasma, which would technically lead to basically the same issues as the nuclear reactor. The same would also go for antimatter fuel as well, but I guess the discovery of room temperature superconductors could probably alleviate the issue. One possible solution is a convoy of a transport vehicle with charging station, be it nuke fusion antimatter or whatever, but that is one extra unit and one extra weak spot, and quite a huge one, just damage the mecha cable at any point of its length. However, if we look at the general timeline of energy storage tech inventions, along with their maximum energy capacity, we can actually see something remotely reminding Moore's law. We are generally getting better at energy storage, and maybe one day we will build a battery good enough for mecha after all. Graphene batteries look kinda promising, and who knows what kind of energium we will discover in decades to come. So, given this trend, and being optimistic, even despite all its issues, I would rate energy source for the mecha as an average iron and glass tier. It is for now far outside our reach, but probably is kinda possible. If we count the average of these key tech parts, we get tungsten tier, hard sci-fi, which sounds kinda promising. Our grandchildren might even live to see and pilot a mecha. More than that, the smaller is the mecha, the less problems it will have with structural and energy requirements. That means, if we don't go kaiju size, but stop on something more modest, mecha can be diamond tier possible right here and now. And indeed, they already exist. There are actually working car-sized prototypes. On the other hand, mecha can also get stupid big and go to cake tier. If we only value scientific plausibility of mecha by their size, I'd like to mention a curious example that demonstrates the full spectrum: anime Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann. Nobody watches Gurren Lagann for its realism, of course, but it actually starts in a very hard way, with a barely exoskeleton-sized mecha. It quickly progresses to tank-sized mecha though, then there are battleship-sized mecha, then there are city-sized mecha, then moon-sized mecha, and it goes beyond that. Mechas kinda end up punching galaxies in Gurren Lagann, which makes some of my sci-fi hair turn grey, as well as breaks into the ultimate bottom tier of cotton candy. But let's return to the moderately sized mecha, just slightly bigger than exoskeletons. These should be diamond tier possible, right? There are prototypes, you said? Well, yeah, there are some. But some of them rely on external power source, some are not truly bipedal and rely on wheels, and almost all of them are slow and clumsy. We are far from the perfect interface yet. Nevertheless, we more or less can build them. That's right. The thing is, physics and cybernetics are just one half of the mecha issues. The other crucial half are practical applications, that is, military capabilities, industrial potential, economical impact, as well as ethical and political aspects of the mecha. Let's start with military science. If we overcome all the engineering challenges and craft a realistic, moderately sized military mecha, it would turn out to be somewhere in between military helicopters and tanks, in both its mass and size, as well as in some key mechanisms of action on the battlefield. Let's run a quick comparison between these three then. We'll have a look at 4 base traits: defense, offense, mobility, and support capabilities, and rank each from 1 to 6 stars. Tank obviously gets top 6 stars in basic armor, and modern battlefield advancements demonstrate that there is still a lot of potential for its evolution. Helicopters can't be too heavy, because they need to fly, so they can only accommodate relatively light armor, which gives them 2 stars at best. Actually, helicopters have such an amount of one-shot weak spots that I will probably leave them with 1 star only. Mecha, as a ground-based vehicle, can be heavier than helicopters, but they run into aforementioned structural support issues, so they can't have armor as heavy as tanks do. More than that, mecha has a lot of joints, and each one of those is a weak spot. Damage any big joint and you might just leave the mecha helpless and useless. Because of that, mecha only gets 2 stars in armor. Armor, however, is not the only defense mechanism that war machines have. There is also evasion. In here, helicopters of course score the top 6, because of their high maneuverability. Evasion is kinda problematic for the tank, since it can only go forward or backward, but it also lays low to the ground, which makes it harder to hit. So for the evasion it gets at least 2 stars. Mecha, given its humanoid-type anatomy, can evade attacks way better than tanks, but on the other hand, it is also much easier target for projectiles, since it stands high above the ground, and it cannot fly like helicopters do. So hitting Mecha will be probably not much harder than a tank. Maybe even easier, depending on what you shoot with. I guess I'll just leave them with the same score as tanks. Besides armor and evasion, another crucial component of vehicle safety is reliability of its human component. Tanks require crews of 3 to 4 soldiers, with some general technical knowledge and special skills for the roles of the driver, gunner and loader. Tanks are simpler in structure and operation than helicopters or mecha, and they can keep going after losing 1 or even 2 crew members, so they get 5 stars here. Helicopters have pilot, co-pilot, and can also have extra crew members, like gunners. Pilots need longer training and are much more vulnerable to the attacks than tank crew, which leaves helicopters with 3 stars at best. Mecha are usually depicted as being piloted by 1 or 2 humans, and if we stick by something realistically sized, there probably won't be any room for more than 2. As we have already established, real-life human-controlled mecha will require either a week of training or advanced neurosurgery, probably followed by a week of recovery and a week of training, longer but much more efficient. This is not where it ends, though. Pilot is either a single or one of 2 crew members on board, and as we'll see later, mecha are quite costly. So you want your pilot to know not just the steering wheel, but also the machine as a whole, so that he's capable of some basic repair jobs in the field, or at the very least so that he doesn't break the mecha too fast. Mecha is the most complex machine of all 3, and getting to know it will demand a lot of time. I'd suggest that theoretical mecha pilot training would take, at the very least, no less time and resources than that of a helicopter pilot. Even more than that, since pilot will drive mecha as a bicycle, as to say with their gut, not knowledge, pilot and mecha will become intricately connected. Each machine will have its own small nuances and will demand some time to get used to, so you probably won't be able to just switch pilots between mechas and expect the same result from them. In case of total crew loss, both tanks and helicopters can still be operated, almost instantly in case if vehicle itself is undamaged and there is some new crew available. For mecha, it will take longer. Mecha pilot can be, of course, much better shielded than guys in the helicopters, but the only real place for him to stay is in the torso or the head of the mecha, which kinda makes an easy target. So, while pilots being intimately connected to their mecha is a surprisingly hard sci-fi, from military point of view, that is not a very good idea, and mecha only get 1 star in crew reliability. If we count the total sums of the defense stars, things do not look so good for mecha. Well, let's go on. Maybe where they truly shine is on the offensive. In attacks against ground-based targets, tanks surely score 6 stars. They, however, have limited to non-anti-air capabilities, and if you install all the necessary tech to shoot flying targets, it kinda turns from a tank into another type of military vehicle, called SPAA, or Self-Propelled Anti-Aircraft Weapon. Some smaller caliber weapons can be installed on the turret, but these will mostly be useful against smaller drones, so tank only gets 1 star for anti-air offensive. Helicopters, on the other hand, can host a wide array of weapons, and the total combination of their machine guns, rockets and guided missiles turns them into formidable opponents for both ground-based and flying targets, with 5 and 4 stars respectively. Mecha is an interesting case here. On one hand, it's terrestrial and can probably carry a gun similar to the ones that tanks do. On the other hand, its top raise is high enough above the ground to use helicopter-type munition. So, do Mecha get top scores in Offence? Well, there is one issue: the recoil. As one man said, for every action there is a counter-action, and in every gun, after every shot, there is a counter-force that moves the barrel in the opposite direction from the projectile. That's recoil. It's not that big of a deal for tanks. They have shock absorption systems built in turrets and armor, and can afford themselves to just roll back a little after a shot. Helicopters maintain stability due to gyroscopic effect, so they are kinda sensitive to recoil by their very nature. Because of that, helicopters generally avoid weapons that have intense feedback, like turrets, and use low recoil weaponry, such as missiles and machine guns. In case of Mecha, recoil happening in the upper part of the machine is very risky for the stability, and believe me, you want to avoid falling at all costs while in the Mecha. That means Mecha will have to switch to the lower recoil, helicopter types of munition. Mecha can carry even bigger and better rockets than helicopters, but they have one serious drawback here. Helicopters can shoot from different altitudes and angles, as well as quickly move to different positions between shots, which both would be an issue for Mecha. Because of that, Mecha will only get 4 and 3 stars in ground and air offense. There is one more offensive capability that fans of the Mecha will probably bring up: the close combat. Mecha are naturally good at close combat, right? Well, sorry, but no. First of all, again, there is recoil, and after landing a blow with a fist, Mecha will struggle to maintain stability as much as after shooting a tank-type turret. Second, Mecha will need fists or weapons made of some very ultra-high-grade durabilium to hit, say, a brick wall or a tank armor and be capable to do that with the same thing more than once. If we have heavy knuckles or some long sword-type weapon, we get extra problems with balance, of which Mecha already has enough. Third, and that is probably most crucial, nobody really goes into close combat on military vehicles these days, since projectiles are just way more effective. And even if we consider close combat to be a viable tactic, you are especially not interested to throw into it something as fragile, complex, and unstable as Mecha. So, I will not put close combat on the list, but just for the record, even if I did, Mecha do not really score many stars here. What we should really add to the offensive trait list is the amount of ammunition that each vehicle can carry, and tanks get top tier here: 6 stars for 30 to 50 rounds, each potentially capable to take out another tank. Helicopters can carry even heavier ammunition, but they have way less of it. They are only known to carry up to 16 missiles, which is 2 to 3 times less, so helicopters only get 3 stars here. Mecha, as we have already figured, will probably be more helicopter type than tank type in its weaponry, and unlike helicopter, it can carry much more of it. Unlike tanks, however, Mecha have additional stability and balance issues, which bring in certain limitations of how much extra weight it can have, so I will rate it 5, not 6 stars. Overall, it seems that offensive capabilities of military Mecha would be more or less comparable with firepower of a tank or a helicopter, but they certainly don't have any special overwhelming bonus advantage here. Not enough to justify their abysmal defense, anyway. Next on our list is mobility. Wise man Sun Tzu once told, "Move swift as the wind and closely formed as the wood, attack like the fire and be still as the mountain." In other words, doing war means moving fast and often. So what do we have here? In maximum speed, helicopter gets maximum stars, since it flies. While wheels are definitely more effective and faster way of locomotion than articulated limbs, tanks get the unfortunate debuff of having not exactly wheels, but tracks, which are slower, as well as tanks carry heavy armor. And in the end of the day, their maximum speed rarely exceeds the maximum permitted traffic speed in the cities. In short, tanks are not exactly built for speed and only get 2 stars here, while Mecha scores 3. It is not as heavy and can switch from walking to running mode, which can be really efficient if it is properly stabilized and supplied with energy. Next, we have rough terrain movement. Mountains, swamps, desert, forest. That would be 5 for helicopter. It only loses 1 star for weather and landing terrain limitations. Tank tracks offer only a limited degree of maneuverability, but with a varying degree of success, tanks can traverse deserts and swampy areas. In forests and mountains, they can get stuck on rocks or between the trees, as well as tanks are incapable of climbing up and rolling down under certain angles. So they only get 3 stars here. Mecha, being lighter built than tanks, will still have an impressive mass, the one that is not spread along the tracks, but rather concentrated in 2 spots below their feet. That will make Mecha sink in sand and in the swamps. It will sink to some degree on most terrains actually, except for metal and concrete. In mountainous areas, Mecha can definitely demonstrate improved climbing capabilities compared to tanks, but at the higher risk-reward ratios, since Mecha can much easier fall to death if they lose balance. As for forests, well, while Mecha might be better in maneuvering between the tree trunks, there are also thick tree branches. Tanks can just go under them, while Mecha will have to either learn to crawl or get equipped with some motorized saws, which brings in extra weight and complexity, of which Mecha already has more than enough. So the best I can give Mecha in rough terrain mobility is 2 stars. Next, we have water mobility, and helicopters score 5 stars again here, since they can easily deal with targets on the surface and in the shallow waters. There are even specialized anti-submarine helicopters, and the only water-based challenge that military helicopters will face is crossing oceans, but still, their fuel tanks are big enough to cross lakes and even seas. Both tanks and Mecha, however, are limited to shallow water at best, and even that would be risky and will have to be avoided whenever possible. Some tanks are better equipped for that and can cross rivers, but water is harmful for both mechanisms, as well as both can easily get stuck on some underwater obstacle, from which Mecha will suffer much worse, given its high ground pressure and stability issues. Maintaining stability with significant part of body being underwater will become even more challenging, so Mecha will only get 1 star here, while tanks get 2. Then, one more crucial terrain type to be considered is urban environment, which is very different from the other terrain types, and is sadly very common in modern-day warfare. Helicopters, again, score 5, their only problems being limitations of landing spots, as well as added risks of running into building, and thus reduced maneuverability. Tanks do more or less okay here. Not only can they move through streets, but are also capable to climb up and down debris piles if necessary. Still, there are many issues tanks face. Navigating narrow streets, making sharp turns, then there are trees again, plus lampposts and bus stops, so tank will only get 2 stars here. Mecha, on the other hand, will be probably in their best element in the cities. They naturally have high mobility, they can maneuver between most city obstacles, and they are not as afraid to hit a wall or a corner as helicopters are. Instead, they might be capable to climb buildings. Mecha, of course, are nowhere near as fast as helicopters, but they have enough advantages here to score at least 4 stars. General mobility of Mecha seems to be just slightly better than that of tanks, and far behind of what helicopters can offer. However, war is not just about shooting and moving around. It also demands medical, technical, informational, and many other types of support. So, maybe Mecha is a support vehicle after all. One of the basic type of support commonly needed in the military is reconnaissance, at which helicopters are just the best. They can cover a lot of ground to gather intel, they can keep close to the ground to stay off radar, and while they are noisy, they can always get away fast. Tanks are not only noisy, but also slow, clumsy, and rather limited in movement and observation angle options. Tanks get 2 stars at best. Mecha will be even easier detectable than the tanks, but at the same time they will have better observation capability themselves. Being high above the ground, Mecha is kind of a walking watchtower. If it can duck, climb, and rotate, I guess Mecha might get up to 4 stars for recon capabilities. Then one thing expected from a military vehicle is its transportation capacity. How much cargo and humans can it move along? And well, while tanks can transport some stuff and guys on their armor, they are in no way specifically designed to carry cargo, and that capability diminishes in combat, so they get 2 stars only. Helicopters, on the other hand, are specifically made to move things by air, sometimes in remote and otherwise inaccessible locations. They are limited in their maximum capacity, of course, but some helicopters do it better than others, and the best ones will score up to 5 stars here. Mecha might initially look like a good candidate for a military cargo transport, as well as a couple of peoples can be seated on the armor. However, raising cargo will grant Mecha additional issues with balance and construction stability, of which he already has many. Even if Mecha is somehow capable to even out these issues, it will still fail to do what helicopters can. If Mecha attempts to deliver cargo in a remote location over a barely traversable terrain, it will face even more additional balance issues, which will make the whole process as dangerous as dancing on the minefield. Because of that, Mecha only get as much as tanks do here, and even that actually might be too generous. Next on our list, we have medical support, and helicopters excel here as well. Some are specifically built for medical support purposes, and a helicopter is probably the fastest way to get wounded to the hospital, which in medical terms means the best. Tanks can transport a couple of wounded inside, but they are in no way equipped for that, and might suffer from cluttering the already confined space. Transporting wounded on the armor of the tank is an even worse idea, since tank is a natural target for enemy attacks, and that might easily transform the wounded into the dead. Mecha carrying wounded human in his hands is as good of a target, but what's worse, the hands of the Mecha will also shake with each step. And believe me, shaking body is the last thing you wanna do to an ill or a wounded person. You are much better off getting transported to the hospital by an ambulance, a regular truck, a simple regular car, or maybe even a motorcycle, rather than in the hands of the Mecha. So Mecha ends up with 1 star here, while tank gets 2, for at least not actively killing the transported bodies. In terms of tech support, however, Mecha might be really useful. If it has prehensile hands, Mecha turns into a giant engineer-mechanic unit that can easily move and adjust details that even a dozen of humans can't. Say a broken turret of a tank or a giant piece of rubble stuck in the armor. They won't be able to carry a lot of spare parts along because of poor transportation performance, but Mecha might be certainly useful in performing technical maintenance, as well as they can be used in construction works, so they get 6 stars. Tanks with special gear attached might be capable of cleaning minefields, building bridges, and taking part in fortification constructions, so they might get 3. Helicopters can be used to transport spare parts and tech specialists, but we are not discussing transportation now, and helicopters' speed and maneuverability does not matter that much anyway, if we speak about fixing damaged machines, not wounded people. Unlike people, machines can wait. As such, by themselves, helicopters cannot really do much of technical or engineering support and only get 2 stars here. One more support application that modern war machine can have is a mobile connection and electronic warfare platform, or even a drone base. Which do you think will excel at that? Well, Mecha, for once, has advantage over tank here. While its higher stature makes it an easier target, it also kinda turns Mecha into a natural walking radio and radar tower. Helicopters can do all of that as well, plus they can fly, but helicopters are also the noisiest, which makes meaningful verbal communication hard. So helicopters only gain 4 stars here, while Mecha score 5. Their only problem being shielding all that huge intricate internal mechanism from the high-intensity electromagnetic waves. Actually no, wait, Mecha have another issue here. They are the most energy demanding of all 3. They have issues with batteries already, and being a mobile EMI cannon or a walking rebel radio station would surely demand a lot of energy. So I guess Mecha will get as much as helicopters in this one. Tanks score 2 stars, since they have the basic radio connection and can be equipped with some extra devices, but lack the elevation bonus, as well as tanks are generally not designed for that. Tanks, however, make an okay drone base, since they can carry a lot of them, as well as some batteries, but that's mostly on armor, which makes drones and their stuff susceptible for damage. You can stick some additional small drones into the cabin, but it's already cluttered as it is, and the crew will probably need an additional drone pilot specialist, hence even more space. Being low to the ground, a tank also does not exactly make up a good spot to control drones from, which can cause problems in certain environments. So all in all, tank would get 3 stars for drone base potential, while helicopter makes up an interesting case here. If anything, helicopter is more of a niche competitor with the drones rather than potential flying aircraft carrier with them. Helicopter is rather limited in what it can carry, and its power reserves to share with the charging drones are limited as well. Most things that drones can offer, helicopters can do themselves, and there might be even less space for extra drone pilot in combat helicopters, so they only get 2 stars. Mecha needs energy for himself just as badly, if not worse than helicopter, but as a ground-based vehicle it can carry more, as well as it makes up a natural radio tower and a landing spot, so despite the energy issue, I'll give them 4 stars here. So that kinda sums it up for the support category, and it looks like Mecha has a definite advantage over tank here, but still loses to the helicopter. Now that we've got 4 base stats for each, we can convert stats into percentages from the possible maximum, because for some stats we rated 3 parameters, while for the others up to 6. And we get a great overview of what place might Mecha have in modern warfare. As expected, tanks are equally well equipped for both defense and offense, while helicopters are a bit more vulnerable. Mecha, however, are even more vulnerable. They will be the most glass cannon of all 3. Mecha also does just slightly better than tanks in mobility, but none of them is even close to helicopters here, as well as helicopters are also the best in support roles. And as a support unit, Mecha also seems to be somewhat useful. Now we can finally answer the question that we began with. What would be a military application niche for Mecha? Is it possible, for example, to use Mecha as anti-tank unit? Well, no. Mecha will inevitably lose in one-on-one duel against tank, due to its low defense, and its slight advantage in mobility is not big enough to tip the scales. Tanks have their own slight advantage in firepower. If Mecha was to fight a helicopter one-on-one, I would say it would lose again and again because of lower defense, and this time also because of definitive disadvantage in mobility. In fact, Mecha are either equal or lose to helicopters in basically every parameter, which means that if you wanna build a military Mecha, you might be much better off just building a helicopter. Does that mean there is no place for real-life mecha then? Well, maybe, or maybe not. Let's see what we can make out of it. We have a unit with very low defense, so it doesn't have to face anything more dangerous than infantry. It is well adapted for the urban warfare, as well as it is strong in the support capabilities. That is, as long as it gets supplied with enough energy. So, I guess we were looking at that all the wrong way the whole time, guys. Mecha is not a war machine. Rather, real-life mecha will probably be more like police cars. In some modern cities, charging posts are widely available, and the most common enemy you might face in urban areas are humans. Inferior defense of the mecha, while too low to compete with tanks, might be just enough to stand against the rioting crowd. They can be equipped with drones, water guns, pepper spray guns, and such, but even without all that, mecha are also effective against humans in a plain psychological way. A humanoid figure twice or more the normal size naturally scares the shit out of us. So that means, it seems that real-life mecha, if they are ever gonna exist, will probably replace not the tanks or helicopters, but rather vans with heavily armed policemen. That, however, leads us to another mecha issue, the economics of mecha, or as I like to call it, the Mechanomics. Let's compare the same three units in how much money they require. In production costs, tanks score 3 coins. They might be costly, but are fairly simple compared to the rest. Helicopters rank 5 coins. They are more complex and require additional costly tech for flight-related issues. Mecha, however, are even worse. As we have already established, they will need hulls made of some unobtainium and some very advanced electronic brains to keep in touch with pilot and keep up the balance. So Mecha scores 6 coins here. Because their component parts are so delicate and precious, Mecha will also get the top score in upkeep, service infrastructure, and repair costs. Helicopters, as any aircraft, require regular maintenance, as well as helipads and hangars, so they get 4 coins, while tanks only require 2. Tanks have the cheapest ammunition and spare part cost. On the other hand, tanks consume quite a lot of fuel to keep all that heavy armor on the move. They can use regular diesel, however, while helicopters require specialized fuel. Because of that, I'll rate energy costs for both at the same 3 coins, while Mecha, as we have already established, has enormous energy requirements, and whatever decision we'll choose, it will cost us extra, so 6 coins it is. Mecha also scored top coin for pilot training expenses, since a theoretical part of it will demand a lot of time, and practical will possibly involve costly neurosurgery. Helicopter pilots need extensive training and simulation practice as well, so they get 4 coins, while tank crew might be operational within months of training, so let's say it's 2 coins. Besides all that, we will also need to consider the infrastructural impact. You don't want to repair your roads every time after a vehicle uses them. As well as, to a certain degree, you are not interested in destroying roads on enemy territory, since you might capture it and will then have to handle the cost of repairs anyway. Helicopters don't make any extra expenses here at all. They can only flatten the grass and do little to none damage to the surfaces they land on, so they only cost 1 coin. Tanks are heavy, much heavier than cars, and countries which run military parades with tanks have to modify them to minimize their impact on the asphalt. In general, roads after tanks need repairs, so tanks get 3 coins here. Mecha, as we have already figured, has high ground pressure and will thus leave enormous footprints, which will turn any civilized country highway into your average post-apocalyptic provincial Russian road. That kinda also renders Mecha quite useless for application in many non-military fields, such as construction, mining, and transportation. Mecha thus scored the top coin again. What do we have in the end? Well, helicopters are obviously more costly than tanks, but none of them comes even close to Mecha in how big of a budget hole they'd make. Potential costs of creating and maintaining a Mecha is probably better compared not to a tank or helicopter, but to a nuclear submarine. So, the rule number 1 of Mechanomics is you are probably not interested in building mecha at all. Wheeled vehicles and helicopters are totally good enough. Besides Mechanomics, there is also Mecha-ethics and Mechapolitics, which do not seem real-life mecha-friendly as well. If you use mecha as a police unit, not only will it damage city roads, it can also stomp civilians to death, by accident or on purpose, and that makes a very bad picture in the news. Because of that, using mecha against protesting civilians would be only possible in autocracies, which are not exactly known for their interest in human rights. However, autocracies are also not exactly known for their technological superiority, as well as they are commonly limited by sanctions in which tech they can get, while to build mecha you will need the most advanced tech from all over the world. The country that is the closest to be able to build police mecha these days is probably China, and let's hope they don't do that. At the end of the day, it seems even while we probably already have all we need to make a real battle mecha, there are kinda absolutely no reasons to do it. Mecha will get outcompeted by both tanks and helicopters on the battlefields. They are also not city-friendly, and they are goddamn expensive and complex. So, while theoretical aspects of mecha average at hard sci-fi, tungsten tier, and might even reach diamond if they go small, their practical applications are hopelessly cake tier, and if we make an average of these two halves, we get into a total of aluminum tier, mediocre sci-fi. To put that into perspective, in the end of my general video on kaiju, I concluded that these giants generally stay in weak sci-fi tier and below. That is actually good news for us in case of kaiju invasion. While giant mecha are not very plausible, kaiju are even less plausible than them. So, if there will turn out to be kaiju all over a sudden after all, there are quite good chances that we will actually manage to build mecha against them. That, however, does not relate to Mecha Godzilla or Mecha Kong or the such. These have no human pilots and are more of a giant robot type of contraption, which is an entirely different story. I have spoken almost exclusively about bipedal mecha in this video, while there are also so-called spider mecha, and these would be a different story as well. I could do a video someday on one of these topics. Also, if we come back to this machine-to-human chart, there's one category I haven't mentioned: robots that are shaped in human likeness, so-called androids and genoids. I can do a video on them someday as well, or maybe I can do a video on different mecha models, comparing how they stand out in sci-fi hardness competition. So leave me a comment of what you would like to see more, and I'll see what I can do. If you liked this video, leave a like, and if you'd like to see more like it, subscribe. That is scientifically proven to work. Thanks for watching, stay hardcore, and see you in the next video.